Hey, this is Michelle, and you're listening to Words with Michelle, the podcast, a show where I sit down and have conversations with influencers on a range of topics, anything from natural hair, employment, discrimination, food, relationships, and everything in between. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you want to send me an email, hit me up at michelle@wordsmichelle.com. Thanks for tuning into the latest episode of Words with Michelle, the podcast. I'm having so much fun getting back into podcasting on a regular basis now. I've been interviewing a lot of people over the past couple of weeks. Being the chatty girl that I am, I'm loving it. So since I've been getting into all things podcasting, I thought why not speak to a seasoned professional in the podcast game. I had the utmost pleasure of speaking with Sherley Joseph a few weeks ago. We share the same name, but unfortunately we're not related. But it'd be really cool if we were. Shirley is the host of the Black Canadian Creators. She's a professional podcaster and digital media strategist. Before I start the show, I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Exhale Hair Studio and Beauty Supply, located at 155 Clark Boulevard, Unit 4 in Brampton, Ontario. Want to update your due for the new season? Book an appointment with one of the trained staff of professionals who will have you taking selfies all summer long. Drop in or give them a call at 905-457-9413. Now back to the show. Talking with Julie was not only enjoyable, but it was very informative. She let me know what podcasting was like 10 years ago and what it is like now and where it's going. She's been recognized for her work by Apple Podcasts and has recently co-hosted a podcasting summit. Because she provided so much information, I decided to do a two-part show. So in this first part, Shirley talks about what podcasting was like when she started and where it is right now. In part two, she'll be discussing where podcasting is going, as well as her unwavering support for Black content creators. So stay tuned for that episode. I asked her to give us a quick rundown of who she is before we started the show. So please welcome Sherley Joseph to Words with Michelle.
Hi there, sac passé, sac à fait, bonjour. I'm Sherley Joseph. I'm a Capricorn who loves any and everything podcasting. I'm the co-founder of the Chonilla Network. It is a podcast collective of mainly Canadian and some American podcasts. One of them that you may or may not know is Black Canadian Creators. I'm the host and also the community manager, community founder of Black Canadian Creators, where it's mainly about spotlighting wonderful content creators that happens to be identifying as different types of Blackness in Canada or expats Canadians, Black Canadians who are creating abroad. And I just love to showcase them on Instagram and stay connected or communicate through the Facebook group. And trying to do more things this year and beyond where we connect outside of the World Wide Web.
Thanks. Great. It's a pleasure having you on the show. Honestly, I'm part of the groups and I've seen you for years online. So I'm in awe. I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not
Oh
worthy.
no, no. You've been an early like person who was part of you've been part of the group for quite some time. Yeah. So
Seriously.
I've been paying it. Yeah. I see you and I see you do your thing and I see like the changes and how you evolved and yeah, I love what you do too.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so my heart's melting right now. So I feel so happy to have you on the show again. So thank you. But I have to ask, how did you get into podcasting? It's
Oh,
not new form. I just started 4 years ago, but I know you started like long, long time before that.
yeah, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I
That's
started in
good.
like so I got introduced to podcasting in 2006 actually.
Wow.
My background is in radio broadcasting. I went to Humber College for radio broadcasting and I'm a bit of a rebel. I tend to like to do things outside the box. And radio was just for me at the time. Now it's not like that, but at the time when I graduated, which was a while ago, um you had to basically go to a small town and work your way back to the city that you'd like to host a show or produce a show. And I wasn't willing to go to Boonland, Yukon somewhere. And then, no, no, like, hey,
Respect to
you know
everyone.
what? Yukon right now has some amazing jobs, so I'm not putting it down. Like, but yeah, I just wasn't, where I was in my life. I graduated, and then I found out that I was pregnant, and I was like, do I really want to like sacrifice to go out somewhere? And I was supporting my life partner, which he is also like my business partner as well for the Chonilla network. And there was just a lot of variables where I was like, I don't know about this radio thing, and I
Mm,
love it so much, like I was the kind of kid, and I've mentioned this in so many like interviews, like I didn't play with Barbies. I love to pretend to be a news anchor. That's how I used to
really?
play as a kid. Yeah.
You knew a
And
long time ago, like from your child, that you wanted to get into this.
oh, absolutely. Plus I love tea. I love drama. So I used to I don't like
Oh
to
my
be
God.
in it,
That's
but like my parents used to have like these old school like tape recorders in order to I guess they were kind of podcasting before it was a podcasting thing. Um, but they used to record in cassettes to send to their family in Haiti, and I love that recorder. And
oh,
so I would use it to play and force my brother to be my co-host. And I love like people. I just love any and everything broadcasting. Television obviously like raised me. I'm a latchkey kid, so it says a little bit about my age.
okay. No,
And
don't worry.
so
We're the same. I need to ask.
yeah,
Okay, so you're okay. We were latchkey kids as well. Me, my sister, my brother. So what
yeah.
did you watch? Okay, I know it's so not a part of the story, but what did you watch? You said you watched a lot of television. What were some of your
Oh my
favorite
God. I like honestly, it's so funny because like recently one of the hosts like today's special when I was a little kid, Sesame
shows?
Street,
Yeah.
love a living in living color, Cosby Show, Different World changed my perspective and honestly like made me decide to go to college. So that's why I winded up going to Humber College because it's not something I really thought about
Okay.
until watching A Different World really changed my point of view about okay, I'm going to continue my education. I loved watching Oprah. I really loved her style of interviewing. I'm obsessed with Christina Amanpour from CNN. I just love the
Mm.
way that she interviews and the way that she's like an investigative reporter. And believe it or not, okay, I like I did love Howard Stern. I still do, to tell you the truth. I know it's shocking. So like that's kind of like if you kind of remove the silliness and the ridiculousness, and now that where he is and he's a much more mature, but he is always, if you really pay attention, has been an amazing interviewer. And I love his style on how he infused his like some aspect of what he has gone through or how he relates based on his experience when he has a conversation. And I thought that was very fascinating and interesting. And so, so yeah, so it's 2006. I was working. I decided basically like not to really pursue radio, and I was working at a company, and they had a contest, and I won like a iPod Nano, and that iPod Nano I still have it because it really literally changed my life, and that's how I discovered podcasting. And so at the time I listened for to podcasting regularly for like 2 3 years. um I was just obsessed, and most of the podcasts that were there were mostly comedians. So I got to hear like the early version of people like Joe Rogan and Mark Maron and those kind of people now that are like humongous, right? Um and so yeah, it was nothing, it was predominantly the time that I listened was really inundated with a lot of comedians, no structure whatsoever. Shows used to go as long as they want. You'd have 1 hour show, 2 hour shows. I know when we started, our longest show that we recorded was 6 hours. with guests. With guests. Yeah,
Okay.
it was a couple in New York and they managed to like it was mainly her. She was a comedian in New York and her husband would kind of hop in and out because he was a lawyer. So sometimes there's certain things he's like, "Oh, I'm out of here." Like he could stick around and then when the conversation wasn't as bad, then he'd come back, you know. So yeah, so we a lot of the things we see that's being adapted today, we were doing it way ahead. Like we were doing, back in 2011, 2012, live podcast recording like what we're doing right now, but with an online audience. Before Twitch existed, we did it before even YouTube had a live component or feature into their platform. So yeah, I've seen I've seen the changes and the growth and the ease of creating a podcast today in comparison to the hurdle that we had to go through when we started.
I can imagine. So, I mean, like, so then it must be not a lot easier. I want to say that, but I mean, I can't imagine it back then, like before, like 2008-ish or something like that. You're talking,
Yeah. Yeah, 2008-ish, early 2009. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
can't,
we've been doing it for quite some time. Like when we were doing it, you had to know a little bit of HTML, like a little bit of code.
oh, okay.
Um, you had to learn how to like, find ways to create your own RSS feed.
Yeah.
And so now, you go on a platform and, whoever is your podcast hosting makes it easy for you. So yeah, we were doing all of that. And a lot of times I grew up as a techie kind of kid. So not only that I did play with Barbies, but my parents were like any type of new technology.
Mhm.
I'd be like six, no, not six, but 7, 8 years old. And my dad would be like, I got a new stereo, figure it out, put it up for me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
Oh, wow, awesome. It's good. It
okay.
exposed you to so much. So you got to learn like hands on, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that experience of my parents just kind of like telling me like, "Hey, put our, stereo together." And like, at 8 years old, okay, sure, kind of got me into technology and got curious to anything that's tech related.
So it's
So podcasting, like the love of broadcasting and tech, that's what I feel podcast is.
yeah.
Just those two things that I really adore and love. It was just a natural yes and progression to get into it.
Okay, great. So I want you to talk a bit about Chonilla. Like, tell me a bit about that podcast then.
Oh gosh. So we started Shonilla like again, yeah, like I said, like around early to late 2008, early 2009. And how we started is we were listening to a show called Keith and the Girl. They still are going on today. Actually, recently the girl Hemda, um, they've been doing it for like 20 years, and this year she decided to do her own thing.
Hmm.
So her co-host is continuing the show. They're at like 3,000 plus episodes, these guys.
Oh,
Yeah.
crap.
I'm
Wow.
I'm always like telling people or clients or even when I have speaking engagements or I'm a speaker, I always like to mention them because I feel like sometimes it's like you got to know where things have started and the people who kind of were pioneers to the way that a lot of people are doing podcasting today may not necessarily know like how. And I feel like those two really exemplified what I feel like the majority of people are doing now, especially in the comedy aspect. If you just like
Okay.
focus on conversations and guest, interview style, it's like a lot of people, a lot of people like that were guests on their show. I don't know if Joe Rogan was, maybe he was because he's a comedian, but they used to like showcase a lot of comedians in New York City. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was on too. And these kind of people who would be on their show was like, what's this thing that you guys are doing? And then next thing you know, they started doing their own thing. So I was listening to them and my life partner and I, we were when we'd listen to the show or when we like I'm in an interracial relationship. So when we would go through the days of like our everyday or whatever we would, the news that's out there or whatever we're reading, it was really interesting to see not only how our perspective was different, but also how the world treats us differently. And I
Mhm.
have firsthand seeing how the world treats us, you know. So having this sort of pseudo access to whiteness, to be very blunt, was very interesting. And to me, how when we'd have conversation, I'm like, didn't you notice this? Didn't you think that was weird? And he's like, I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about, you know? And I was like, really? Like, you know, so, or even the conversation we'd have, like, we would always think, like, I wonder if other people think it's funny. We always had the approach of not being afraid to talk about, and that's what Chonilla really is about. Chonilla is definitely a show. What I say is two things. It's either it's a show where we talk about things that you're not supposed to talk about at work, which is politics, religion,
Ah,
you
okay.
know, race.
Hmm.
And but we put a lot of funny into it. We like to kind of place some kind of comedic aspect to our perspective on things that's going on in the world. And the other tier too is like we thought this is kind of like a cool way to journal our lives and for our kids to hear how mom and dad like have grown or how they think or what they've been through, and a little bit too to save them some money from any form of therapy. They can just listen to the show and be like, oh, okay, this is why
Oh my God, that's
I'm
sweet.
like this. Yeah.
Oh my God. So when you started, were you like one of the like were there a lot of black females doing this? Were there any black females doing this at all?
No, no. And I was for like no, there wasn't, let alone like in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Um I was fortunate because through, and this is the reason why I always like to mention that my up and like my coming up to podcasting, and why I always mention Keith and the girl is because they're very strong to have a sense of community. And at the time, a lot before Patreon, before the Facebook groups, when you had a website, a lot of these podcasts would have a forum. And so they had a forum, and within that forum, they had a section for their listeners who happened to start a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so their listeners are very diverse, from mostly from the States, but actually pretty international. And So when we started our show, because originally we wanted to start a blog, but we're like, we're not writers. I'm not a writer at the time. Um, so we're like, why don't we start a podcast? Like we could do it kind of like their style, but in our own way, you know, kind of like the banter and back and forth. And so yeah, so we would post in that within that subgroup our latest episodes, and then it caused for other fans of their show who had their own podcast too to kind of like, hey, I was listening to your show, it's really good, like we'd love to have you on. And then I would hear them, and through that it became where shows like my you know where's my 40 acres, Black Guy Who Tips, um, you know, my our show Chonilla. There was like two other shows, three other shows. There's so many where we recognized like pretty much the black folks who were podcasting who were predominantly American. We just all kind of naturally supported each other, came together. If one person was live, you know, everybody would go and support them and be in the chat, or if some, you know what I mean? Or yeah, we just kind of be on each other's podcasts a lot. So we would share each other's audience a lot. And it was not like, it was very unconscious. It was just kind of like a natural thing that just kind of happened. And I really really love the way how we just kind of like, hey, we know in this podcast world, mostly especially at that time, there was really not that many of us that look like us. So that was, I think, maybe for survival or growth reason, we just kind of like latched onto each other and just like, okay, I'll be on your show, you'll be on my show, and yada yada yada. And it just kind of grew from there.
Nice. Okay, so I wanted to ask you more about podcasting too, just because you to me you are the guru. Like you are like you've seen it all. Like first of all, you went to Humber and you did radio, so I mean obviously that you're like the techie side and the creative side. So if someone wanted to get into podcasting, what are a few things they need to do? What would you say?
I would say definitely know the reason why. And I know it's so typical, even like whether it's podcasting or any business, but know what's the reason for you to start a podcast in the first place? What do you think your audience is going to look like, or what they, in terms of like creating um an avatar of your audience per se, right? So I think when I was doing radio, it just kind of naturally happened where we're like, okay, knowing like, okay, us being an interracial couple, we're like, okay, we want to get perspective from different interracial couples, but do they think like us? Because not every interracial couple is thinks the same way. Like our approach was like very, we do see race and acknowledge each other's culture, and we don't do the whole I don't see color thing. That
Hmm.
was not our motto.
Yeah.
You're like, where, yeah. So we were thinking, are we the only type of interracial couples who challenge each other when it comes to talking about race and religion and politics and stuff like that? So we were very conscious, like, okay, these are type of that's the type of audience that we want to attract. And they would be making, this type of household income pretty much similar to who we are. Like, we really modeled the avatar based on who we are more than anything.
Yeah.
These are the type of people who have a great sense of humor when it comes to the weird things that happens in the world, but are able to have an open dialogue about sometimes like really difficult subjects or topics, right? um and so we really wrote it like, kind of like, yeah, we wrote it down. And it's interesting on how much doing that's exactly who you attract. And it's a great exercise on, like, in order to kind of pre-build your audience before you start building your audience. I would say the name too. Put some lot like a lot of time people do not put that much time in the name. I say this because having the name Chonilla was a challenge for us. Like, a lot of people were like, what does that mean? Or even when you're inviting a guest, they might not do it because they don't even know what that name even means, right? I mean, we've had listeners who literally like listen to us all the time for 2 years, because we used to do our show every single week, every single week for 5 years straight. And
Wow.
then there was a year or two where we were doing it, I think a good year, 5 days a week. That was a lot. Yeah.
So wait,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry. How did you edit? Did you edit? Did you edit? Like, tell
Yeah.
me
Oh, yeah.
better than me, my friend. Like that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. That accumulated to about, I think, a good 560 to 600 episodes. That's
Wow.
where we're like, that's when we burnt out.
Crap. I commend you. I do.
Yeah. So, but yeah, the name was really big. That's something I talk about a lot, the importance of really put the time in when before you even start a podcast, is think about the name. If you have a play on words, like for us it was a portmanteau from the word chocolate and vanilla.
Yeah.
And so I was gonna say, like, we had people who listened to us, and then 2 years later they're like, oh, now I get the name, like, um so yeah. So taking the time to Google and search to see if anybody else or any other brands are using the name is so important to save you time in the future. Because what if you blow up? What if you get huge? Your podcast gets huge, right? So it's these things that you want to think about. And also asking people, if you do a play on words like we did, because it was a portmanteau, is asking people like, okay, how would you spell Chonilla? Like, ask a good 10, if you're lucky, 20 people, but at least ask your closest 10 people, how do you think this name for this podcast that I'm thinking to start is spelled? And if the average is spelling it a certain way, then that's the way you should write your show.
Wow.
So like the name of your show, that is, because the
Yeah.
name is really, and I say this from experience, and that's why I called my show, at the time I called it Black Canadian Content Creators. But I was noticing people were always saying Black Canadian creators or Black content creator. Like, it was never the full. And so I was like, you know what? I'm changing it to Black Canadian creators. It's much easier to, the name explains itself what the show is about. And it's easy to say and spell. Um, and just that, going through that, learning everything and all the mistakes and what are the changes that I would do differently from Chonilla, I pretty much applied with Black Canadian creators, that the community just kind of grew a lot faster than what than 5 years of creating a community with Chonilla. We got nominated. We still sometimes, like, I haven't posted anything in a while, and the name itself, although yes, it's not fun. That, Apple Podcasts will think about the show during Black History Month. But I know that it's not just the name. The name is one step that lets people get curious enough to listen to your show. But I could back for sure that if we didn't have the quality and the quality of the production of the show, that we wouldn't be up there. Like, Apple would have never mentioned us.
Yeah.
So yeah, the name is huge, and knowing why you're doing it and what does your audience look like is super important before even turning on the microphone.
I will be quite honest and said none of that have applied to me. Like I didn't like I guess I stumbled into it, so I didn't take any of that stuff into consideration. So it's kind of cool. I wish I talked to you before I did my podcast. I took nothing into consideration. I just had the blog Words with Michelle. I'm like, Words with Michelle, the podcast. That's literally how it came about. So I wish I spoke to you before.
No, but it's a good name. Like, I don't, I see so many podcasts or content creators, and you always stand out. Like, I have not run into any content creator or podcaster that has a
Oh
closeness
yeah,
to
I know mine is like
that.
it's kind of safe,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. You're
no,
safe. You're good.
thanks. Okay, so then talk a bit about Black content creators. I was actually thinking about when I wrote that question, I was thinking more about the Facebook page. Like, what is, you kind of did mention why you created. Um, is it, where would you like to take this? Where would you like to take either your podcast or the Facebook or everything
Yeah.
you're doing?
I honestly, I would like to take this as an agency eventually, as a way to help content creators connect with brands,
Yeah.
and to continue to grow the show through the Chonilla network. And to be quite honest, to take it like a little bit beyond Canada, but other parts of the world too. Um, Mainly, I want it to be a space for content creators to connect and see each other and help one another, to kind of create the sense of this naturalness that I really love that the Black American podcasters had with us. And I felt that that was really, really lacking here in Canada within the Black community anyway. And so I mean, I selfishly at the first I created it because when we started the show, we were very specific and strategic not to let people know that we were Canadian, just so we can have a much wider and broader, listenership. And but after, I was really surprised that although the majority of our listeners are American, um, I was really surprised on how much Americans wanted to know about us up here. And because I remember like doing a news segment, and then we started off doing like Canada stuff, and then I stopped, and they're like, "No, bring it back. We want to see."